Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentreo podcast. We're here tonight at our open house having some conversation with some of our guests. I'm here with John Quick, CFO of Gentreo. John, welcome on in.
Hey, thanks for having me.
John, you mentioned something out at the open house about purposeful planning pathways. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure, that's quite the mouthful. Basically, by purposeful, I mean it's one of the great things with Gentreo is it's kind of mass customization. And the reality is estate planning, like many things, is your needs when you're 25 aren't the same needs when you're 35, aren't the same needs when you're 45, 55, kind of so on and so on. And so part of being kind of purposeful planning is it's making sure we're doing the right things for the right people based on stage of life. So, for example, when you're 25, you probably think you're going to live forever, but more importantly, more likely than not, you don't have a wife and kids and all this other stuff that you're looking to kind of plan the next generation. It's much more, do you have the generation above you, your parents, is everything taken care of? And so when someone who's, call it, 25, 30 joins Gentreo, it's, do you have a copy of your parents' will? Do you know where it is? Are you going to be able to access it? Do you have your parents' medical information if it comes up in an emergency? Do you know what their wishes are as far as if something happens, what they want done, and who they want to make the decision of who gets to do that? If something does happen, and this is, this was something I personally lived, is, my father passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. And it was up to me to kind of put together the funeral and think of, well, obviously the eulogy is always yourself, but like, what music should be played? Are there friends of his that I got to think to, how do I get them invited? Make sure the right people are there. Who do you want to be as pallbearers? What are some of the things that he'd want said? And so it really is, I think, a mystery for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people end up just kind of winging it, for lack of a better term. And unfortunately so. And sometimes it works out amazingly well, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's interesting because I think having someone go through that process of like, okay, let's get a copy of my parents' stuff. Let's ask them, like, where do you want to be buried? What do you want done with your body? Some of these things, it just provokes a conversation. And your parents, it's actually a kind of cool moment where they can say, like, this is what's important to me. These are the things that I really care about. Like, and some parents, like my mom said, I'm dead. What do I care? But she let me know that she wanted her body dedicated to a university for medical science, which I wouldn't have known. And again, it's a small thing, but it's a nice thing. And, I think she told me some of the things that to her were really important to be done. And, and I think that matters. It's never going to be good when someone passes away, but at least that way I think, it feels like you're doing it the right way, which I think is of comfort. Very morose. Didn't mean to talk so much about death, but I just, it's funny because most people think when you're 25 it's not relevant. The other thing when you're 25 to 30 is you might not be married, but you could have a long-term girlfriend. If you had a high school sweetheart and you're together for 8 years and then you pass away, it turns out that they have no say and they get nothing. And this is someone you could have been living with for 8 years. It could be super serious and a really important relationship in your life. And what'll happen is everything defaults to your parents. And depending on what that relationship's like, it's all the money you've worked hard goes straight to your parents. All the decisions about what's done with you, what happens to you and where you go and what happens to everything. They're completely shut out. It's like they don't exist.
Just because you haven't slapped that tag of marriage on it
yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So it just and so I think that's not right. I mean, that's not what everyone wants to be done. And so I think that having an estate plan at 25, even though obviously no one wants anything to happen, but it means that you treat this other person, this partner, whoever it is, as someone, and say that, look, you're important, and in fact we have built this life together, and even though we're not technically married, the answer is I want you to have this, or I want you to make these decisions, or I want you part of that, I want this split this way. And the unfortunate thing is, for 80% of people, that's an overall statistic who don't have an estate plan, but when it comes to that demographic, it's even higher. And so there's a lot of people who unfortunately get in these situations and all of a sudden it's like, it's nothing. But then even worse is it leads to even more animosity, right? Because then you get people trying to involve lawyers and saying, I'm supposed to have this, you get this, I taken the stuff that's in the house. And so it just gets ugly in a way it shouldn't, and it shouldn't have to. And, I would just hate to think that if I was that age and something were to happen to me, I wouldn't want my longtime girlfriend or my long-term boyfriend or whatever else, I wouldn't want them fighting with my parents. I would just want this to be a time for everyone to come together and really to mourn and kind of help move on, as opposed to just creating more friction and more bullshit for people's lives.
And it seems like, speaking as someone who's in their late 20s, a lot of us are living kind of in the now, and it sounds like if people my age and people in this kind of younger generation could just focus on doing a little bit of this purposeful planning for the future, they could have a bit more peace of mind living in the now.
Well, it just avoids potential awkward situations. Like I was 31, I believe, or 32, and I had my appendix burst in Guangzhou in China. And I came within half an hour of dying. The whole story is ridiculous as far as just, I had to take a taxi to Hong Kong in order to get treated, and then the first hospital, they're like, all right, your appendix is gone, you're septic, you need surgery, you've got to fix this, but we're full. And you're like, wait, what? They're like, we're full. I'm like, you take me in an ambulance to another hospital? Like, well, you can. That'll be $3,000. Otherwise, the taxi stand is right over there.
Jeez.
And so I took a taxi cab up a mountain to a hospital called Matilda in Hong Kong. But the point was, I worked out 6 days a week. I was, I could run for days. I could do anything. And all of a sudden, it was like, okay, like you need your appendix out. And if your appendix isn't out in the next hour, goodbye. And it worked out really well for my brother because, he was the person on my life insurance. He didn't know that. But it would have left just a ton of paperwork, a ton of aggravation. It would have just been a total mess. And so I hadn't really thought of estate planning at that point. I'd done some life insurance just because I had a friend who was in insurance. It would have been probably the best investment because it would have been, I think a $10,000 check would have gotten $1 million plus given to my family. But the point is that you don't know. And then, obviously I don't mind admitting it. I'm in my 40s now. I'm 42. My life now where I've got a wife and 3 kids is very much like I've done my estate planning because there's a lot to it. And this goes back to that kind of purposeful planning. And my needs when I was 20 and 30 were very different than my needs now. My needs now are, okay, is everything in place? If something happens to me, does my wife have everything she needs? I have a little bit of an interesting situation in that I have 3 kids. 2 of the kids were lucky enough to come with the marriage, and then my 3rd kid was born 2 years later. Mm-hmm. And so if I didn't have an estate plan, my first 2 kids aren't considered my kids, which means that everything would go to my 3rd kid and they would just be ignored and pretended like they weren't ever a part of my life. And that would be heartbreaking. And again, it's not, it's just one of those things you don't think about until you're kind of like, take a second and be like, oh yeah, I guess depending on what state, there's government or some law somewhere is going to dictate what happens, and it might leave lasting scars for people that you don't want to do that to. Yeah. So, and look, and that's just kind of one thing, and that's the thing with this statement. There's so many things that come out of this that if you take the time and dig in, are there. But I think a lot of people kind of hand wave over and just be like, I'm dead. Who cares? Yeah. My kids are 10, 7, and 2, and I think about my 2-year-old, and he wouldn't have known his father. Like at 2, like my 10-year-old, my 7-year-old, I've been in their lives for most of their lives. They know me. They know who I am. They know, they know how much I love them. They know kind of my hopes and dreams for them, and they know enough. He'd have no idea who I was. So being able to record a video of just like, hey, here's your dad, and then here's what it was like to hold you for the first time, and here's I'm gonna cry on this podcast. But those are things that I'd want him to have, not closure, but just that memory, that experience. And I couldn't imagine him not having that, because he obviously you'd get videos that whatever had been uploaded online or whatever my wife had on her phone, but I'd want him to have more than that. And so to me, that's part of an estate plan. And when there is money which is going to be there for all of them, I don't want them to sit there at 10 being like, all right, I got a bunch of stuff. Obviously I want that to pay for college. I want to do something where as a father, even if I'm not there, I could help with the down payment on their first house, or I could buy them their first car, or something meaningful.
Leave that effect.
Yeah, but just again, purposeful. Being able to do that, being able to say that this is what's going to be there, and this is I want them to know that this came from me. Mm-hmm. And those are things that are impactful and important. And then, when I'm older, and I'm let's fast forward 10, 15, 20 years. Now there's a whole other set of things. My kids are grown, and all of a sudden there's grandkids. And the same thing I said about kids, of wanting the kids to exist and feel special. Like, I want my grandkids to feel like their grandfather knew who they were. I don't want it to be like, Grandpa left stuff to, Julia, Soren, and Ethan, and Grandpa left stuff to these grandkids, but child number 3 or unborn child of my other child, it's you want something to be continually refreshed so that it's current. And it's not sitting here and I'm telling people you're going to redo your estate plan every a month or two, but every year you should take a look and be like, hey, this is what I got, and is this what I want? Am I sure that this is what it is? And I think that people don't think to do it for whatever reason, and it's unfortunate. And I think for a lot of people, one, estate planning is expensive if you don't use a Gentreo or like that, and they're sitting there saying, look, I'm not going to keep paying for this year after year after year. That's just doesn't make any sense. And by the way, they're right. It doesn't make sense to spend $1,000 a year on estate planning. No. But in a service like Gentreo, where it's a nominal amount per month and a nominal amount up front rather than a large amount up front and a large amount every time you do something, it does make sense to look every year and say, is this right? Is this current? Is anyone being missed? Do I want to rethink anything? Because or has anything changed in my life that I want to do this? And it's, as I said, it's your legacy is your family and what you leave behind. And I think for a lot of people, like, the last thing you want to leave behind shouldn't be chaos and destruction and animosity. I come from a family, and I'm probably way too personal for this podcast here, but my mother's side of the family, it was massive fighting. My great grandfather had done very well for himself and left a very complicated estate plan that dealt with different generations and did this and that, and it all ended up in court, and the only person who won were lawyers, and this family feuded for over 20 years over a dwindling estate where legal fees kept chipping away at it every year, to the point where everyone ended up with a little something, but not near what it should be. And it left brothers not speaking to sisters and sisters not speaking to brothers, and it left the next generation. It only got settled once that first generation started dying off, because they all felt they were owed something that they weren't getting, or it wasn't enough, or something was done improperly. And it just led to them digging in their heels, and it ruined that family in a way that those are years and times that they'll never get back. And so it's really one of these things that I hope more people take seriously. I think as a mission, it's kind of cool to be working with a company where you look at it and say, this can have a real positive impact on people's lives. It's unfortunate because it's not something people can see immediately, because it's one of those things. It's like life insurance, it's only there when you're dead, which is like, okay, that's hopefully a long time. But when that happens and you're like, I'll just speak for myself and speak personally, like, I know that if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, the house is paid off. I know the kids' colleges are paid off. I know that, everything is taken care of in a way in which no one has to worry about anything, and that, my family isn't getting knocked into a different life and put in a situation that's beyond the pain and hurt of me going, creates all these other residual problems that I wouldn't want them to have. And I think estate planning is kind of like that. It's making sure that when things happen, that you're not focused on nonsense, and instead of having again, I'm going to go personal. My father passed away unexpectedly in 2018. It's 2022. The estate's not fully closed, and there wasn't money in the estate either. It just isn't done because it was just, I want to say clusterfuck, but that's probably going to get edited out. The issue was none of the papers were there. There were trusts, because he was an accountant, made things needlessly complicated, but no trust documents to be able to deal with anything. There was things all over the place. And when there isn't the information readily available, it's a problem. He had two uncles of mine. One was a brother, one was a brother-in-law of his, refused to serve as executors. So we didn't have executors. So we had to petition the government to get executors put in place. The will that we had predated my parents' divorce. So my mom was excluded because they're divorced, so she can't do things. So everything was a mess. And what was even worse is literally 5 minutes of just making a simple update would have prevented all this craziness. And so I can say from personal experience that not doing it means an estate that could be done in a month takes years, things that could be done for basically nothing, and money that could be handed off without any taxes or probate or anything instead gets tied up and becomes a massive aggravation, and the only one who wins are the lawyers you have to pay to help sort it out, or the hours and hours of nonsense you have to do yourself, which no one wins. And that's where, I think that it's kind of cool here to try to help and try to make it so people don't have to do so many things. And I think, it's one of those things that'll be kind of cool because when people here go through and be like, oh, it wasn't so bad at all. And you're like, yeah, it wasn't. But it wasn't so bad because you did what you needed to do. And by the way, it's like the minute of preparation saving hours of pain.
Yeah.
So the getting everyone onto Gentreo, you can sign up and do your first document in 5 minutes. It's literally that simple. And, we're making it even easier. The goal of the company is so that 5 minutes, you got a first thing in place, which obviously having anything in place is better than nothing.
Yeah.
Your annual review where you see what you got, and it's literally you can, right now you log in, but eventually where we're going is you could send a text, you could do whatever, just small, simple updates. Basically, we want it in the future so you can communicate however you want. If you want to text, hey, my information changed, text someone, get it updated, throw in the vault. You want to be able to email. You want to be able to to whatever it is, dictate verbally. There's so many different ways that we can make this simpler and easier. And that's really the mission, is how do you make this simple and easy for someone to do, simple and easy for them to update, so that there's no barrier to getting things done. And the second things are done and current, the better everyone's is, and the better situations are. And that's a pretty cool thing to try to do.
Yeah. Leave the legacy, not the mess. Right?
Exactly.
Well, John, this has been a pretty deep conversation. I definitely thank you very much for sharing everything with us. One question that I ask everyone who comes onto the podcast, and I'll ask you in the viewpoint of speaking to your 20 to 30-year-old self, if there's something you could tell everyone about estate planning real quick, what would you just want to let everyone know?
Oh, my 20-year self. God, that guy was stupid. I think the cool thing would have been, by taking a look at your estate plan, or just even thinking about it, it would have just been nice to take a 20-year-old kid who was off jet setting and working his ass off and doing stuff, to just think about the future and the future he wanted. And so I would say, I think you should do something just because you're working hard, you're earning a lot, you should protect what you got, and you should be doing something to do that. But also, think forward to where you're going, and this might be a good way to go do it. And also think about the relationships you have with the people in your life, like your brother and your parents and your friends. And candidly, this could be a cool opportunity to tell the people who matter to you that they matter. And I think the 20-year-old self, if he'd done an estate plan, it actually would have been pretty. I'd love to read it. I'd really love to read where I was, because, I think everything I made or earned, I didn't need to go to my parents. My parents didn't need it. My brother didn't need it. I think it would have been. I would have done something crazy stuff like, if the Leafs are in the Stanley Cup final, take some portion of money and buy tickets for my best friends. Make my parents take a vacation, and therefore, the money's put aside, but they can only spend it if they, agree to get on a plane and go somewhere. Or I would have done fun stuff like that, just to let the people that matter to me, let them know and give them a way to say I care. And I think that could have been really cool.
Well, John, thank you very much for sharing your story. I appreciate it. This has been the Gentreo podcast, interviewing some of our guests here tonight at our open house. John, thank you very much for coming on.
All right, thanks for having me.